Hello, and we are live, and it's morning. Sorry, guys, I'm late. I just woke up, did a few necessary things, made coffee, and let the cat out. And I just overslept because I'm totally uh, messed up schedule wise. I've been ill. Uh, I think it was food poisoning. However, just in case it might have been contagious, I isolated myself as much as possible. Like a friend brought me Alka-Seltzer, but she set it down outside the door and left, and then I went outside and picked it up. Ordinarily, I swear by the pink stuff. Oh, this is Rite Aid brand. Uh, usually known as Pepto-Bismol. But although that coats your stomach and I like it and all that, um, I needed Alka-Seltzer because it is similar to aspirin, so it reduces a fever. And I'm pretty sure I had a fever, even though the thermometer that I bought online from Rite Aid doesn't work. It arrived with a dead battery. It was not the one I ordered. The battery was dead and there were no instructions. And of course, no store anywhere has any fever thermometers. Forget that. So, anyway, it was like 90 degrees and no air conditioning. But I think I actually had a fever. It wasn't just a hot day. And the Alka Seltzer helped. That's been since I think Thursday. One Thursday, Friday, sorry, Sunday, Monday, 5 or 6 days ago. And my throat is messed up from being unable to keep food down. Yesterday, I ate half a slice of cheese toast with tomato soup, of course. Couldn't eat the whole thing. Here's the other half. But I'm much better now. And so I thought it was time to do my Tuesday show. I'm going to talk a little bit about a very mean man. He's a public figure. I won't give you his name, but some people can guess who he was. And if anyone really wants to know, there's a public record of what I'm about to say. Well, thank you, Strontium. Let's see, I didn't even type good morning in the chat room. I have a member named Strontium X nitrate. Big old letter X. Hi, Henning. Well, anyway, what I'm about to say is a matter of public record in the Superior Court of Orange County in Santa Ana, California. If anyone cares to get the transcript, it's rather expensive. Well, this person went into court and claimed that I had been in a mental hospital, that I was crazy and taking prescription drugs for psychosis, and that I had threatened someone with a gun. It's all in the court record. Total lies. And in a fair world, that person would be in prison or imprisoned or at least civilly sued for perjury and malicious gossip. The one thing he did say that was true, I'm not sure he even told his name truthfully, but aside from his name, he said that one year I failed to buy Christmas presents for my son, and his father had to buy him presents. Well, yeah, that's true. I had no money. I couldn't even pay the rent. So I bought my son food and took him to his father's house and explained that I could not buy any Christmas presents because I was broke. I don't know where the gun thing came from. I didn't own a gun, never had owned a gun. That's ridiculous. I'm angry still, and this was 4 decades ago, approximately. It was outrageous. But things are looking better now. Things are looking good. I'm still being accused of things on Facebook, but you know what? It's just Facebook. People get on Facebook and turn into little green monsters or big brown monsters. And they assume that because I don't like one particular person, that I don't like anybody who shares one particular um, point of view with that person. That isn't how it works. I see individuals. I condemn acts of violence, no matter who perpetrates them. It doesn't mean that I'm against a group of people who share a race, creed, religion, national origin, gender, or whatever, or lifestyle. I don't care about those things. I care, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, I care about the content of your character. I like good people, the same way I like good music. I always liked country and some soft rock and roll and some classical and some light opera, they call it, musical comedy. Just a minute. This doesn't mean I'm ill. I do this every morning. Little coughing, little runny nose. My sinuses hate me, and I haven't used the neti pot in a while. And let's see. Good morning and welcome, everyone. Well, it's only one uh, terrible typo. My dyslexia shows up in my typing. And where was I? I'm not ill. I just cough every morning, and I need to use the neti pot. I hate it, but it works. Anyway, uh, I like good music too. So my husband taught me to appreciate not only opera and various classical music I'd never heard before, but also hard acid rock and roll, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, even the Grateful Dead, who were really a country band more than rock and roll. He used to play their St. Stephen album over and over. One side of it is a single song that runs about 30 minutes. And of course, that's the title song, St. Stephen. St. Stephen with a rose, in and out of the garden he goes. And it goes on and on. Well, at the time, I didn't know who St. Stephen was. In the book of Acts in the New Testament, Luke writes about how Paul presided over the stoning of St. Stephen. Well, at the time, his name was Saul, but shortly thereafter, Saul was knocked off his horse and blinded, and he was taken to a Christian for faith healing. And he was healed, and he was changed, and he changed his name to Paul with a P instead of Saul with an S. And Paul became one of the most important Christian evangelizers who went to the pagans and said, "You don't have to be a Jew. God loves you too. God loves all his children." Oh, that's interesting, Strontium. I know how to spell words, but my fingers don't. They get the letters backwards. But I know because I was terrified as a high school student, and I spent hours and hours. Oh, hi, sweetie. Hang on, I gotta open a can for the kitty cat. I got to. Hang on, little kitty, kitty. Yes, that's my little sweetie. And she's a hungry girl. There you go. Yes, that's a good kitty. All right, sweetie's been fed. Sweetie, although she's feral in the sense that she just doesn't trust people, not even me, and I feed her. But Sweetie is my feral cat. Sometimes she, especially in winter, she even sleeps in the house. But I'm not allowed to touch her, even though once in a while she'll touch my hand with her nose while I'm putting food down. Looks like I'll stay isolated for a couple extra days just in case. This is not COVID. Don't worry about that. But in case it might be contagious, I won't have contact with other people. Now, the same way that I like good music, I like good people. I also like good books. I'm terribly ignorant in many things about science fiction, which is, I suppose, strange since I've written some science fiction and I was married to a science fiction writer. But when I was growing up, I was highly focused on nonfiction, and I spent hours and hours studying English, vocabulary, spelling, grammar, not much literature, sadly. The curriculum did include some Greek myth, but there wasn't a whole lot of literature in high school. I did read the Foundation trilogy because the school librarian handed me the boxed set and told me to take it home and read it. Well, yeah, my kitty cats are safe. It's a good thing they don't catch it and die, too, or get very ill and cost me a fortune in vet bills. I want a dog, but I can't get one because I can't afford another vet bill. One trip to the veterinarian would ruin me financially. So anyway, um, I like good books. I like good music. I like good people. And I worked very hard as a high school student to get as good as possible at grammar and spelling and punctuation and writing. I wrote book reports mostly, some essays, some poetry, and some stories. The first story I really thought was complete and a good story was called No One's Arg. Um, no One's Arg. Argh. You might remember when Peanuts was a comic strip in the newspaper, and whenever Charlie Brown suffered a disappointment, he would say "arg." Well, that's where "arg" came from. And he had this little dog named Misty who would run and hide under the bed whenever she heard a loud noise, especially on the 4th of July. So I imagined a family with a pet named Arg. And there was a huge storm came up with thunder and lightning and pouring rain. And Arg ran under the bed and howled all night long. And the Arg howled so long that the whole family went mad and ran away. And the Arg was all by herself under the bed. And so she became No One's Arg. And just in case, I think it's obvious, but it was a humorous take on Noah's Ark. Pièce de résistance. Yeah, the Foundation trilogy, which um, was actually there was a fourth book. I don't think I ever had the fourth book, but it was modeled on the history of the Roman Empire. Oh, I do like Argyle socks, Oswald, but no, the Arg had no guile. She was just frightened. So anyway, I'm glad that all these social media and especially smartphones with cameras and uh, so forth did not exist when I was growing up. People thought I was racist because I liked the comedy of Joan Rivers and Red Fox. Well, Joan Rivers on her, not in on TV so much, but on her record albums. Remember vinyl LPs that you put on a record player and drop the stylus or needle and it spun around and played it? Well, on her record albums, Joan Rivers told Jewish jokes because she was Jewish. I don't remember. I remember only one of her jokes, but I think I'll just keep it to myself. And I remember one long extended joke that Red Fox told, which contained all these various words that we don't use when describing people of color. It was hilarious, but uh, you don't tell those jokes anymore. It isn't polite. I also liked Bob Newhart, and his jokes are still pretty harmless today, like the one where the uh, bus driver's school is in session. The teacher is teaching a new bus driver how to um, make sure that people drop their shopping bags and all their groceries roll down the aisle between the seats, or how to stop and start so the old lady who's still getting on ends up all the way at the back of the bus. Bus driver driving school, stuff like that. I and back before Bill Cosby became persona non grata, a great joke about the dentist saying, "That didn't hurt." That's what they said to me. How do you know? I still can't help myself when a doctor says, "Uh, you might experience some discomfort." Uh, okay, I have to pop out the chat. It's frozen on me. I'm afraid to try refreshing the computer. I might get, yeah, Sanford and Son. Love Sanford and Son. Yes, Red Fox. And Joan Rivers, from time to time, would be a guest host when Johnny Carson took a day off. Oh, and the other, I lost the guy's name. I'm thinking OJ. It's not OJ. It's Oh dear. Well, anyway, he had this, Fat Albert and all that. Um, he had this great joke about how when he was a kid he ate all the chocolate cake and he was busted because he had chocolate cake stuck in his mouth. Why do I lose names like that so easily? But we still have a few heroes. Now you might know Ben Carson as, I think he's Secretary of HUD now, Housing Urban Development. He was a very gifted surgeon who grew up in the projects with a mother who really was not well educated. She had a third grade education, but she made sure that her children really took school and studied seriously. Them read books aloud to her. And she was a hardworking woman. Well, anyway, Ben Carson wrote about that in his biography, Gifted Hands. And he became basically a brain surgeon. He was very well respected. And now he's, um, from time to time, people suggest that he might run for president. I would vote for him, but he says he will not run. I don't blame him. I wouldn't want that job. It's horrible. You have no life, no privacy. Let's see. I think my chat is still um, frozen. Uh-huh. Yeah, my chat is frozen even when I pop it out. Oh well. Oh, it looks like I can post in chat. Okay. I really cannot stay a super long time. Yes, I can see that, Strontium. But up top it says Red Fox loved Sanford and Son. What? And then that's it. So if you were asking a question, I didn't get to see it. Ah, that's better. See, my lungs are fine. It's my throat that gets the sinus dripping. I hate it. Definitely doing the neti pot today. Well, anyway, I grew up in a very different world. Born in 1954. So I remember the 60s vividly, but I was a child. And, you know, different perspective then. But in that time, in Culver City, where I was born and lived until the age of 11, oh, Red Fox wasn't racist, but his humor was considered racist because he used all those words. The N word isn't the half of it. There's I can't think of a way to say what the other words are, but trust me, they're offensive now. In the 60s, it was different. Everybody around me used at least two or three of those words from time to time, and they didn't mean anything by it. But I do remember that our neighbor, who was a nurse, had a housekeeper come in and clean her house while she was at work. Uh, I'm not even going to try, Oswald. Well, sometimes I think her name might have been Mrs. Bailey. I know it started with a B. We never, she was an adult, so we children called her Mrs. I think it was Bailey or something like that. Well, sometimes Mrs. Bailey would need to go to the local grocery store and pick up a few things. And she would invite all the neighborhood children to go with her. Although sometimes she would say, Ricky can't go. Ricky was bad. My oldest brother, he often was bad. But we didn't realize that in 1960, a black woman would not be served. She could not buy things at the store in Culver City unless she had white people with her. Yes, I know strontium, but oh, I see, Oswald. Yeah. And then there were words for Italians and so forth. But we were very respectful. We loved that lady. We got to go to the store, even though we usually didn't get to buy anything because little kids didn't carry around money in their pockets. It was a treat. We didn't realize that people in the stores would not serve a person of color unless she had white people with her. And sometimes she brought her daughter, who was about my age, and we'd play together. Everyone in the neighborhood wanted to play with her because Jasmine was such a nice girl. I mean, we noticed her skin was awfully dark, but that didn't matter. She was a good person. And her mother, Mrs. Bailey, was a good person. Now, the adults around us obviously were racist. And that continued around 1970. Yeah, 1970. After a few years on the edge of the barrio in Anaheim. I mean, really, I don't think it was an official government policy, but the people of Hispanic descent, mostly Mexican, lived in their part of the community, and we lived in ours. And um, in our school district, there was one black family in the 60s, from about 65 to well into the 1970s. One in the whole Anaheim school district. horrible. Well, people were fleeing Los Angeles after the Watts riots. So slowly, um, also Black and Hispanic and other people also moved to Orange County to get away from the poverty, the racism, and so forth. But then we moved to Brea in 1970. Brea is in the north part of Orange County, almost into Pomona, where Los Angeles holds its county fair. It was a brand new housing development, and there was one family from India, and their young daughter was out riding her bicycle, and they were new to the neighborhood, and these white thugs, teenagers, beat her up and took her bicycle, calling her the N word and a few other choice things. Well, she had dark skin, but she was from India, not Africa. And I remember some saying that it was wrong because she wasn't a she wasn't really black, she was Indian. And I was thinking, it's wrong no matter who she is. They beat up a little girl and took her bicycle. I don't know. I don't live in Culver City anymore. I don't remember any statues there except Leo the Lion outside the MGM studios. I think those are gone because now they're Sony pictures. Anyway, yeah, wrong is wrong. I don't care, once again, about your race, creed, color, religion, national origin, ethnicity, or lifestyle, or any of that, or gender. To my mind, sex is what you do. The parts you're born with are gender. What's back? Strontium, did you lose the signal or did I lose it? The rioters, many of whom, by the way, are not, even though they call themselves Black Lives Matter, they're white kids. Some are black, some are white. They all are tearing things down. And they don't care what they tear down. They have no plans to build anything. Oh, they'll steal a bunch of shoes or jewelry or whatever. They'll strip a Costco bare, but they aren't building anything. They're just going wild. And I have no respect for people who engage in rioting and looting and burning anything. And I know they refer to the Civil War and slavery. But that could have been worked out without a war if people had sat down and talked to each other. Slavery was on the way out anyway, even though there were still many Irish slaves and Chinese slaves all over North America, and even Native American slaves. It wasn't profitable, and too many people had a conscience and knew that it wasn't right. But the South was being oppressed by the North. And remember, 4 of the northern states had slaves too, and the Emancipation Proclamation did not free their slaves, only the ones in the South. As a punishment for going to war for what they saw as their constitutional rights. Well, anyway, if the North had agreed to at least reduce the oppressive taxes that were ruining the economy of the South, and if the South had said, hey, we'll set the slaves free in an orderly manner, there would not have been a civil war. But you know what happened? Good old England. You know, there was this little thing in 1775, actually, but officially 1776. A little thing called a revolution. The English lost because they had bigger fish to fry overseas, and they didn't take our little revolt seriously enough. They didn't send their biggest forces here, and they didn't send their best forces here. Many of the redcoats were actually Germans, Hessian mercenaries who fought in the war for money. Very dangerous way to make a living, by the way. You know, you can get killed. Anyway, they lost, so they tried again in 1812. They lost again, but they burned down the White House. So in the 1860s, they decided to try to overwhelm us by getting us into a war where they didn't have to send any troops. They'd already taken over our finances through the Bank of England. And for all his faults, Andrew Jackson, who was a scumbag, he did destroy I think it was the Second National Bank, first or second. But they crept back in. So they funded the South and fomented dissent and made sure that we conducted a civil war, because if our small country, and remember then the United States pretty much ended at the Appalachian Mountains. And yeah, there were parts of us all the way to the Mississippi River. But it was a small country, and if they got us cut in half and split into two countries, it'd be easy to conquer one and then conquer the other. Yeah, so it was really a war over England wanting their colonies back. I don't think it was King George anymore. Mad King George. I forget who was king then, but England still considers us their colonies across the pond. Appalach? Appalachian? Well, when I was in school, they always pronounced it Appalachian. Go, it's ACIAN. That's Asian. So there. I've got to recycle some coffee, but I will be right back, so don't go away. Okay, now I have to resort to Google. I know there are other search engines, but okay, it's ACHIAN. Okay, let's see. Pronounce Appalachian. Oops. Okay, Appalachian. Oh, where'd my chat room go? Come on. Here it is. Okay, my English teacher was wrong. Appalachian. Yes, England kind of pretended they would support the South, and they did somewhat economically in the run up to the war. They bought cotton and stuff like that, but they did not really do a whole lot once war broke out. Yeah, well, England is our origin in that revolution. Our founding fathers were standing up for their rights as British citizens. But the Parliament and good old King George, Mad George, um, just wouldn't hear of allowing an American to sit in Parliament and represent us. So, when one side, especially both sides, but when even one side digs in and refuses to budge, there will be conflict, and it usually turns out to be bloody. Do you know, even when the Magna Carta was signed by Richard's brother John, remember Richard, who spent more time fighting in the Crusades than ruling England? Well, his brother John signed the Magna Carta while he was king. The English kings pretty much ignored the Magna Carta and the rights outlined for, guess what? The nobility, not the common people. The common people were still pretty much slaves. They called them peasants or serfs. That's one of the things that tore apart Russia before the communist revolution. Tsar Nicholas was actually in the process of freeing the serfs, who were basically slaves to the nobility. But he did nothing about their economic situation. People were starving, especially when there was a famine. Now, I'm pretty sure the famine was caused by weather more than anything else, but more than one monarch could have kept his head, saved his own life by sponsoring soup kitchens to feed people. Louis XVI of France didn't learn that lesson the easy way. He lost his head. Nicholas didn't learn that lesson. His whole family was shot to death in the midst of factional fighting among different sections of the communist revolution. Wow. Queen Victoria used to say that there would be no war in Europe as long as she was queen because all the monarchs were her nieces and nephews, and she would not allow it. Let's see. Let me check. Let me see when Queen Victoria died. I'm always vague on that. 1901. So we did have this little thing called the Crimean War. Well, while she was on the throne from 1853 to 1856. Let me see. Yeah. But it was basically a regional war, and it did really mess up Europe, especially Eastern Europe and Asia Minor for some time. it was really about Russia freeing the Ukraine from domination by the Turkish Ottoman Empire. Well, anyway, once Queen Victoria was gone, 1901, things changed, and we had this little thing called the First World War. You know, I never remember what year that started. WW1. 1914. I always think that can't be right because there's this old song about the War of 1812 that starts out, in 1814 we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. But it was 1914 to 1918. So 13 years after Victoria died, World War One. And it wasn't the whole world, but it was a huge war and very awful. But you know what? England, well, the English monarchs and nobility never learned that it's more profitable and certainly more peaceful to have independent allies than to have colonies. Oswald says the English folk were the first in the world to be forced off the land into factories. Well, you see, the tradition from the Middle Ages was that farmers didn't own their land, they rented it from the nobility. Yeah, well, I didn't write the song, Strontium. I forget now who did record it. Anyway, it's a fun song, although it's about a bloody battle. Uh, wow. England thinks they rule us. And in some ways they do, their bank does. Sleepy Dave. I'm late, sleepy. So there. I've been going almost an hour and I'm a little out of it. Johnny Horton sounds right. Thank you, Spear. Um, Johnny Horton. Yeah. We used to have songs that told a story. And it wasn't just beat 'em up, uh, they're awful people, like rap does. I've got my coffee, tea, and water, Sleepy. But I'm going to be scooting out of here soon. I did promise someone I would talk about a book. So let's find one of my books. Um, let's see. Oh, how about The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin? Phil made me read this. Well, you can't really make me read things, but he insisted that I read it many years ago, so I did. Phil knew Ursula Le Guin, but they disagreed in many ways on politics, the left hand of darkness. So this book has been around since at least the 1970s. Let's see. Oh, this one has an introduction. My copy didn't. Well, it won the 1975 Hugo and Nebula Awards. No. Oh, in 75, another novel won, but this one won for 1968 or 9. Let's see. 1969, this novel won both the Hugo and Nebula Awards, and then in 1975, her novel The Dispossessed also won both the Hugo and Nebula Awards. So Ursula K. Le Guin became the first author to win both awards twice for novels. Well, anyway, it's a fascinating tale of a man who is visiting an extraterrestrial civilization on their home planet. And, he has to learn their language, their customs, their culture. And there's this thing called chemering. It's similar to when adolescents hit puberty. You too, Dave. I didn't fall asleep till about 2 in the morning, so I overslept. Woke up at 9:30 or thereabouts. Something in the air, I guess. Anyway, The Left Hand of Darkness. I had no idea when, even after I read the book, but the critics who reviewed it, quite glowingly, by the way, they really praised this novel and continue to praise it. At chemering is when the adult alien chooses his or her gender. Oh, the planet is known as Winter. Anyway, apparently these aliens can at the time, so I think once a year, something like that, they can choose their gender depending upon the gender of the person they're in love with. So apparently it's really about homosexuality and gender identity. I didn't get that at all. I thought it was just a beautiful love story. Anyway, this Earthman is visiting the planet, and his buddy, who is one of the aliens, turns into a woman because he's in love with him, and he's at the time of chemering. Beautiful story, by the way. I had no idea that it was a polemic, and that's a great achievement for any author to present an issue, an important issue, without making you feel like they're preaching to you. Well, my sleeping schedule settled down only recently. It used to be just whatever, whenever. But I think last night, for the first time in weeks, the people too did not play loud, bad music well into the night. It was quiet. It was eerie. Anyway, our sheriff's deputies really don't have time to complain. They've got some serious crime to deal with. Well, our Native Americans have their own customs and traditions. So did the ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks said, you married a woman to have children, but you kept a boy for love. That was the men. A man would marry a woman to have children, but have a boy for love. Um, I don't know much about the Dalai Lama. Anyway, the Romans had the same idea about love and marriage and having children. Uh, the Persians did too. Before Persia became more Jewish, there was this thing called the Babylonian Captivity, and then Persia conquered Babylon and freed the Jews. Well, many of the Jews decided to settle down. It was nice there. I mean, Jerusalem was in the middle of a desert. Persia was gorgeous. So they settled down, and they did not have the same customs as the Persians. So Persia became more stable socially, began to give up slavery because the Jews said it was wrong. Jews had, well, Israelites, they had what we think of as slavery, but it wasn't. It was a way to pay a debt, and it had a limited term. You worked till your debt was paid, and then you were free to either leave or choose to stay. And your children were automatically free because it wasn't their debt. Anyway, the Jews did a great deal to stabilize the cultures of both Babylon and Persia, modern Iraq and Iran. People from Iran still say they're Persian, not Iranian. Iran was Actually, the Nazis encouraged the Persians to call their nation Iran because they believed they were the Aryan people from northern India. Well, they might be. Well, yeah, Arabs are not Persian and Persians are not Arab. See, Persia and India had many, many conflicts over millennia. But they were basically the same people. And before the Nazis screwed up, the term Aryan was the term for the people of northern India. They are different from the southern Indians. They're light skinned. Southern Indians are dark skinned. Hence the caste system of India, which depends to a great extent on how dark your skin is. And the caste system still exists today. I went to college with a young man from India. He was a Brahmin, the highest caste. And although, we're stupid Americans, he said in India, people know just by looking at him that he's a Brahmin. They pretty much know what caste you belong to, just looking at you. Yeah, well, see, it's divide and conquer these days. Black Lives Matter, sure they do. But all kinds of other people are saying, hey, what about us? What about Native Americans? What about Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, Korean, Mexican, Spanish, South American, Central American, Puerto Ricans, who, by the way, are American citizens, Filipinos, Cubans, Italians, Germans, French and English. We have immigrants from all over the world. Some are new here, some have been here for generations and are citizens. And they're saying, hey, what about us? But if you say all lives matter, you just might get killed. My water glass is empty. Hang on. Okay, I'm back. And what about people of mixed race? The most commonly known mixed race, of course, is Eurasian. American soldiers married people from Asia and came home and had families. One of my dad's brothers married a Hawaiian woman, and wow, in the 1950s, that was a shock that a white man married a Hawaiian woman. Polynesian. Oh dear. Oh well. Well, yeah, all human lives matter, Sleepy, but I think kitty cats and puppy dogs and all kinds of animals matter too. But for quite a long time, there was no such thing as a mixed race between blacks and whites. The children were all black, not mixed race, they were just plain black. That's how they were viewed. It's ridiculous. I don't see white, black, yellow, orange, red, green, blue, or purple people. Although if you are purple, watch out for the purple people eater. I just see people. And we're all important. And we're all being oppressed by the few. Well, I don't know. And you have to consider that Africa is populated by more than by other than black people, and this is not solely due to white people colonizing Africa. It's been going on for thousands of years. The Egyptians were not black, but the people of Sudan or Nubia were. And they had a border and they had many wars and they had black Nubian pharaohs when the Nubians won. I think that might be one reason why the Aswan Dam was built where it was. They had this huge monument to a pharaoh there, and I keep forgetting which one of the pharaohs. They actually, an international project moved as much of that monument as they could. Huge statues of a pharaoh and his queen. Well, if you look closely at those statues, they're obviously Nubian. They're black Africans. No wonder the modern Arab Egyptians didn't mind flooding that monument and hiding it under a lake. Most of the people living in the area of the Aswan Dam are Nubian. They're black. And they are pretty much ghettoized. Okay. Um, Apparently, Nubian is an insult to American blacks, but to the people of Sudan, they're Nubians. Go figure. Nubia was a great empire. They even ruled parts of Egypt. All right, I'm going to have to look up. I can't stand not remembering the name of the pharaoh. Oh, come on. There, here. Abu Simbel temples, they actually couldn't move all of the monuments. They were actually carved into the side of a mountain. They weren't freestanding statues. Yep, they're Nubian monuments to, keeps telling me, oh, Ramses the Second. Okay, now let's see. Which one was called the Great? Yep, Ramses the Second, also known as Ramses the Great. He's the one they claim was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. I don't think so. There's just this little mention of a city called Ramses that the Israelite slaves built. But that's probably because I forget whether it's, I think it's in Genesis, might be in Exodus, that it names that town. It's highly likely that a later editor changed the name uh, to of from the old name of that town. I had to moderate a comment by Gerard Perry. I let it in, but if you have a wrench and you think it's a bad comment, feel free to hide it. I find it interesting. Well, anyway, a later editor probably changed it from the old name of the town to the new name of the town so that people reading the scroll would know what he was talking about. For example, see, I don't remember the old name of the town, but they probably built that city when it was called something else. And the example is up here on the mountain. If I tell you I'm going to Strawberry, nobody will know what I'm talking about. Well, a few historians will know because today it's called Twin Peaks. So if I'm talking about something that happened, say, 100 years ago in Strawberry, Pitum, thank you, Strontium. In if I tell you this guy built a log cabin in Strawberry, you go, what's Strawberry? Well, so I would tell you he built it in Twin Peaks, even though when he built it, the town was called Strawberry. They changed the name. And that's kind of interesting. They changed it because when they applied for a post office, there was already another town in California called Strawberry that had a post office. So they had to change the name to get a post office. And they called it Twin Peaks because there are two peaks, Strawberry Peak and Heaps Peak, nearby. Well, yeah, there's a long history of Judaism in Ethiopia, back when it was called Abyssinia. So if I tell you all about the history of Abyssinia, you might know what I'm talking about. So if I were reading an ancient text about Abyssinia, I might change it to Ethiopia because then you'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I think the Exodus happened a little bit earlier than Ramses, but that's based on other people's research. and you can dig into it for yourself. The timeline just doesn't work if Ramses was pharaoh. Nothing else lines up in the histories that we know, histories from Egypt, not just the Bible, but also Egypt. They don't line up with the events that we know did happen. And of course the extremists will extreme atheists will say, well, that proves the Bible's just a fairy tale. But I think it proves that Ramses was not the pharaoh of the Exodus. And then there's the other religious extremists who insist that not one word of the Bible has ever been changed since the beginning of time. Oh, I'm sorry, but we don't have the originals. Vellum and papyrus don't last forever. We have copies of copies of copies. Most of them made by scholars who knew what they were doing. And they did their best to correct errors and to update the names of people and places so we'd know what they were talking about. And our translations in particular are not the original with not a single word changed. If you study languages for any length of time, you will find that many things cannot be translated literally. For example, in German class, the teacher said her car pfeift am letzten Loch, pipes on the last hole. Well, doesn't mean anything to an American. The translation is it's on its last legs, not literal at all. Okay, I guess you guys want to have a conversation with Gerard Perry. Fine with me. I'm going to eat a potato chip. I'm not gonna disconnect while there's a good conversation in chat. I'll let it go as long as it's courteous. It's very interesting that, well, Africa is tribal. This tribe hates that tribe, and that's a lot of what has gone on in South Africa is different tribes at war with each other, even in the 20th century and even in the 21st century. And of course, the white people of South Africa are colonizers, invaders, but so many of them have lived there all their lives, it's all they know. They've become South Africans, not English, not Dutch, but South African. That's how they identify. That's their home. Hmm. Mhm. I did that on purpose. I'm chewing. Hmm. Ah, come on. Okay. Well, the millennial reign It's not something to look forward to. Last night on YouTube, I played a video of Dr. N.T. Wright, Wright, in which he pointed out that many of the prophecies, for example, one in Jeremiah where the sun is darkened, the false star from the stars fall from the sky. Yeah, little dyslexia. The sun and moon are darkened, and let's see, the sun is darkened, the moon does not give her light, and the stars fall from the sky. Well, Wright says that's all metaphor. And it isn't about the end of time, it's about the fall of Babylon. It happened. No Bantu in South Africa? Recent immigrants, huh? Well, anyway, then we've got um, Libya and Morocco, where the people are not black, but they are native Africans. I got to look at a map of North Africa. I haven't thought about it in ages. Here we go. Come on, show it to me. Yeah, we got Libya, Algeria, Morocco, and Egypt, and then heading west, Libya, Algeria, Morocco. The people of those areas, particularly Morocco, are Berbers for the most part, descendants of the Carthaginians. You know, Carthage, that empire that kept having wars with Rome, and Hannibal crossed the Alps with elephants. Well, actually, most of Hannibal's war elephants died crossing the Alps. But anyway, they aren't white, but they aren't black, aren't Arab. And they destroyed their empire by making war on Rome. The Romans did not mess around. The Romans had a very interesting way of collecting taxes when they conquered people. Yeah, they'd take some of their crops. For the most part, the people they conquered didn't have money. They bartered. But their most interesting means of taxation was to draft a male child from each family into their army, usually the firstborn son, so that the conquered people became Romans. Now, a Roman soldier, if he managed to live for 20 years, was given automatic Roman citizenship, but he had to be in the army fighting, risking his life for 20 years. And once he became a citizen, they'd even give him a chunk of land in Italy that eventually became the downfall one reason for the famines that really caused a great decline in Rome was that all these, see, not everyone was a citizen. That was a high social status. They had their little plots of land and they weren't growing food crops. Uh, they grew wine, grapes, you know, but there less and less of the land was being farmed. And then there was a crop failure in North Africa. Libya used to be a sort of breadbasket for Rome, and the crops were failing. Oh, and by the way, the reason the Romans invaded Libya in ancient times was because they wanted control of the African slave trade. So let's not just have a knee-jerk reaction and blame European colonizers for the slave trade. 2,000 years ago, Romans were importing black African slaves through Libya. I hate the Roman Empire. Phil was right when he called it a black iron prison, and when he said the empire never ended. Strictly speaking, it didn't. It just it wasn't conquered, it didn't fall. Rome just kind of fell apart. The people of England were devastated when the Roman legions left to fight a war near Rome because they suddenly had no police. Crime was rampant. Little petty warlords ravaged the countryside, raping and pillaging. And of course, the Vikings were the worst of it. They keep saying they came from Denmark. Well, I guess some did. But basically, from the cold northern climates, raiding the coastlines, killing Irish monks, stealing anything of value. But some of the Vikings eventually settled down and raised families in England. Go figure. Well, they also pretty much populated southwestern France. Well, so like England didn't have a successful revolt against Roman domination. The Romans simply needed their armies to go somewhere else, and they left. And the lands where they left just fell into chaos. Ah, see you later, Oswald. I gotta go soon. Hi, Henning. Uh, it's just been going on for way too long. All this, I mean, it isn't just race. The English hate the Germans. We all hate the French. We consider the Spanish exotic. And the Italians, well, we like their food. But they were disrespected in World War II. And the Italian soldiers were actually quite brave and competent. They just had lousy equipment. They'd be driving their Fiat tank over a bridge and hit a bump and the doors would fall off. Not their fault. This really has to end, this divide and conquer. Possibly 1%, possibly a tenth of 1% of all the people in